For our top story tonight, the war in West Asia is now threatening one of the world's most critical energy lifelines, the Strait of Hormuz. With ships stuck in the Gulf, oil supplies under pressure, the US is offering India a temporary waiver to buy Russian crude. The global energy market is entering uncertain territory. While New Delhi insists there is no immediate shortage, the political and economic ripples are already being felt home. A clear indication that the war in West Asia is having an impact across the world, including India. It's our top story tonight.
The tremors of war in West Asia are being felt across the globe. The conflict has claimed lives and disrupted the global oil supply chain. Reports say more than 200 ships are stuck in the Persian Gulf, while 150 are waiting outside the Strait of Hormuz. 38 Indian ships are stuck in region. With oil supplies badly affected, the United States has offered India a 30-day waiver to buy Russian oil. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the decision was taken to enable oil to keep flowing into global markets. He claimed that this short-term measure will not provide significant financial benefit to the Russian government, as it only authorizes transactions involving oil already stranded at sea. Bessent said US anticipates that New Delhi will ramp up purchases of US oil. He called the waiver a stopgap measure to elevate pressure caused by Iran's attempt to take global energy hostage. Government sources have told India today that India has more crude oil at the moment than what is stuck at Strait of Hormuz. Reprioritization regarding use of crude is happening within the government. The government sources say that there is no shortage of LPG and that refineries have been ordered to increase production of LPG. The government, however, admits the war will impact global energy scenario.
यदि हम स्ट्रेट ऑफ हार्मुज या पूरे पर्शियन गल्फ क्षेत्र को देखें तो यह विश्व की एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी का एक अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण क्षेत्र है। जब इस क्षेत्र में डिस्टरबेंस या डिसरप्शन होता है तो उसका सीधा असर ऑयल और गैस की सप्लाई पर पड़ता है। इन अनसर्टेनिटीज का सीधा प्रभाव इकोनॉमी और ग्लोबल ट्रेड पर पड़ता है।
Russia has said it is ready to supply oil to India if required.
This is up to India to decide. You know, we have always maintained that we have always been ready to offer oil supplies to India, provided India needs those supplies. That's the decision the Indian government should take.
Back home, the development has also triggered political storm. Congress has accused the Modi government of ceding diplomatic space of Washington, questioning why India needs a US waiver at all to continue buying Russian oil.
कहां से हम तेल खरीदेंगे, कब खरीदेंगे, कितने मात्रा में हम खरीदेंगे, ये सब हमारी सरकार का निर्णय है। अमेरिका कौन होता है? हमें सर्टिफिकेट देगा, 30 दिन के लिए आप खरीद सकते हैं, 30 दिन के बाद आप नहीं खरीदेंगे, नहीं खरीद पाएंगे, आपको अनुमति नहीं है। क्या ठेकेदारी अमेरिका ने लिया है?
As the war threatens one of the world's most critical energy choke points, the global oil market is entering uncertain territory. Bureau Report, India Today.
And my first special guest in our continuing coverage on the West Asia conflict is none other than Shashi Tharoor. He is, of course, chairperson of the Standing Committee on External Affairs, seasoned diplomat and member of Parliament. Appreciate your joining us, Dr. Tharoor. Your first big takeaway for what's happened now with a week into the war. Do you believe that this war is now becoming increasingly an escalating conflict that could get other countries, including India, in some way or the other within its ambit?
No, I don't think we're going to get, in any case, dragged into the conflict. But what's happening is the consequences of the conflict are already affecting us and many other countries besides. Because what's happening right now is that oil prices have already started spiking. It was about $65 per barrel before the war started. It's already up at 83 when I last checked, and maybe climbing further. gas supplies. Qatar is one of the world's leading gas suppliers. They've declared force majeure, which means they are out of all their contracts. Factories from India to Korea are going to suddenly find themselves without gas. There are some very serious consequences affecting people already because of this war. And we've already had people affected because of the closure of airports in the Gulf, travelers being stranded, others being unable to move, businesses being affected, people working from home. I mean, lives all around. We're a country with 9 to 10 million of our nationals in the Gulf. For us, this is something that really does affect their lives and their ability to do well, send remittances home, all of that. So we can't be indifferent. It is very much in our interest to demand de-escalation and diplomacy, no question about that. But when you speak of getting involved, I don't think we mean it militarily. There would be no reason for any other country to enter a conflict because that would simply prolong it.
No, when I say in India's involvement, I mean in terms of the fact that India will in some way or the other face the repercussions of what's happening in West Asia, both the large number of Indians who live in the region, as well as you said, energy security. But therefore, what role precisely do you see, Shashi Tharoor, India playing? Because your own party, the Congress, has once again raised questions over strategic autonomy because the United States is saying they will allow India to have a 30-day waiver when it comes to purchases of oil from Russia. Your own party seems to suggest that this is India's strategic autonomy being diluted by Washington, Washington playing the big bully or the superpower in a way. Do you agree that India, in a way, needs to send a tougher message to Washington that, look, we are not going to follow your diktats?
Well, the problem is the consequences if we don't. I think that for the companies that are purchasing Russian oil and putting it into their refineries, without that waiver, they get subject to sanctions which affect all their businesses. So there is, to my mind, a choice that has to be made. There is no doubt that the sanctions imposed by the US and indeed by the EU have not received any authorization from the UN Security Council, and therefore they are sanctions by individual countries. They don't have the sanctity of international law. But at the same time, you have to be realistic. If the sanctions mean that your companies will risk being frozen out of the world markets, frozen out of the American or European markets, then you won't want to buy Russian oil because your companies have an interest in being able to function that way. And for those reasons, I think you must understand that it is imperative for these companies to heed the sanctions, and the waiver will have come as a big relief to them. With that waiver, they can openly purchase for those 30 days, knowing that those purchases will be exempt from any negative consequences for their companies.
But in a way, is this all now boiling down to America playing the big bully, Israel wanting dominant power over West Asia, and Iran, in a way, also having a regime that's battling for its life? How do you see this in the context of the power politics that's playing out in the region? Do you believe that this is a just war, as the United States, Donald Trump reiterated today?
Look, the tenets of international law are very clear, that there is no justification for using force against a sovereign member state of the UN, except in self-defense, which cannot be invoked in this particular case, or with Security Council authorization, which does not exist in this case. The logic of preemptive self-defense, which is something that has been cited by apologists for this war, saying that if we hadn't done it, the Iranians would have developed a nuclear weapon and attacked us first. That preemptive logic doesn't really hold up when the Omani negotiators, who've been mediating talks between the Americans and the Iranians, claim that the Iranians had already agreed to no nukes, zero enriched uranium stockpiles, and other steps that would have essentially eliminated the threat of a nuclear weapon from Iran. The only thing that was delaying the conclusion of those negotiations was Iran wanted, in return for those assurances, to receive structured sanctions relief from the West, because, as you know, Iranian oil is already sanctioned by the West, and we, for example, have stopped buying Iranian oil because of that, just as we're under pressure to stop buying Russian oil now. So those sanctions were a potent force already before all of this. And that's something that we can't afford to ignore.
No, so should we have reiterated that principle that you just spoke about territorial sovereignty, about about the fact that you can't just go into another country and assassinate its head of state, its religious head? Do you believe that India should be drawing certain red lines, or it's best done through quiet diplomacy rather than making any pronouncements?
Look, that's a call each individual government has to take. As you may have seen, very few governments have had the courage to stand up and condemn the American action. Of course, countries in the Arab and Islamic world to some degree have done so. Not all of them, but some have. And in the Western world, Spain, I think, is pretty much alone in saying this was an illegal and unjustified action. Many other countries have felt that condemning this war would put them on the wrong side of a US government, which has not hesitated to show its displeasure in ways that have really hurt many countries.
So do you agree with that? Do you agree with that position that we should not be seen to antagonize the Trump administration? Is Donald Trump arrogating for himself the right to decide which country he's going to invade? One day it's Venezuela, one day it's Iran, and here he's got Israel driving it. Do you believe that we should be standing for certain principles or not?
Rajdeep, I've said this in the past that we have always stood for certain principles in world affairs. The Panchsheel Doctrine enunciates all these principles also. The UN Charter does so. But there are 193 countries which could say it. How many of them have stood up and said it? And why don't they do so? Because they have made a calculation, which is the prerogative of a sovereign government, that they have bigger fish to fry, there are bigger interests at stake in these relationships, and that if the price of articulating such a principled condemnation of the American action is that they will antagonize an America they feel they can't afford to antagonize on other issues, then as a government, they can decide not to do this. Look, we took the same line on Russia. You remember that in Parliament, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, I criticized the government of India for not articulating these principles and condemning the Russian invasion. A couple of years later, when our Prime Minister went to Moscow and hugged President Putin and went to Kyiv 2 weeks later and hugged President Zelensky, I had to admit that his silence turned out to have the strategic benefit that we were able to keep open channels of communication to both sides in that conflict. So you have to, it's difficult for us sitting outside a government to second guess their choices.
No, but that's precisely the question. If I may push you, but that's precisely the question. Your own party today is saying government has ceded its strategic autonomy. Do you agree with that? Or do you believe that, that the government retains the choices that it must make in situations like that, whether we should condole Ali Khamenei's death, whether we should speak out against an Iranian warship that has been sunk in Indian Ocean? Are these decisions best left to government, or do you believe the opposition has the right to say that strategic autonomy is being eroded, that the Narendra Modi government is surrendering, to use the words of Rahul Gandhi?
Rajdeep, the opposition's job is to oppose, and I have no doubt that if we had been in the government and had taken the choice that this government has now taken, they in the opposition would have said the same thing to us. That is how democracies work. I don't think that right now, sitting here and looking at that in that context is particularly relevant. It's a question of how we can protect our national interests. Sovereign autonomy is a means of protecting our national interests. I will say, however, that expressing condolences on the assassination of a head of state is a normal thing to do, and I'm very glad that our government has expressed those condolences, and the Foreign Secretary was sent to the Iranian embassy to sign the official book of condolences. That is the right thing to do. And I will say that as far as the courtesies and between states are concerned, don't forget that we have full diplomatic relations with Iran. There's an ambassador here. And our foreign minister telephoned his Iranian counterpart while he also spoke to his Israeli counterpart. This is India trying to show that they've got channels of communication open to both countries. And I think you really have to respect the choices the government has made as choices that they deem at that point to be in the best interests of India, given that there would be consequences for other choices. At the end of the day, Rajdeep, we in the opposition will always have reason to criticize. We attacked the government when 50% tariffs were imposed on us. We've attacked the government when other decisions were made by other countries. So when our government does something to prevent that kind of retaliation from those countries, when we attack, we're being the opposition, and that's right. That's how democracies function. But I don't think that's the real issue here. The real issue is the first question you asked: how is India affected? What is India's interest? And I would say to you, India's interest is in ending this war as soon as possible. And if we get more influence on those who are conducting this war by not condemning them publicly, then that is something that we might want to do when we're in government. And we might not want to do when we're in opposition.
Which brings me to my final question. When you say ending the war, you spent a long time of your diplomatic career at the United Nations. The United Nations seems powerless to stop this war. All multilateralism seems to have evaporated. And it seems that the United States has arrogated, as I said, to itself the right to decide how this war is to be conducted. Donald Trump today saying that he expects an unconditional surrender from Iran and a regime change of preferably his choice. Where does this leave the world and the United Nations? Conflicts seem impossible to resolve, whether it's Ukraine, Iran, or indeed earlier Gaza. Do you believe the United Nations is completely powerless, impotent, and defunct now?
Well, let's not go quite that far, because there's more to the UN than one particular conflict.
But in terms of conflict resolution?
Let me say, Rajdeep, first of all, we are going through a crisis when it comes to international law, because the fact is that the whole premise of international law and the world order that was established after the Second World War was that power would be tamed by law, would be subject to law, and that any use of power would have to be justified in terms of law. That has been cast to the winds in recent years by many players. Russia's violation of international law in attacking Ukraine, America's violation of international law in attacking Iraq in 2003 and now attacking Iran. I mean, the truth is there have been violations. Israel has violated many principles of international law in its campaign in Gaza. So the fact is, international law is now being buffeted about by those who have the power to disregard its consequences. Does that mean the UN is out of the window? No, it means that in situations where member states that are powerful enough that either are permanent members of the Security Council or enjoy the protection of permanent members of the Security Council, when they take certain steps, the UN cannot stop them because the Security Council has that structure. But that doesn't mean that the law ceases to be relevant. It means that we acknowledge that it is being disregarded in this particular context. We try and live with the consequences to the extent we have to, but we try and reclaim that ground when this conflict is over, so that the next crisis will not lead to this kind of violation. The UN is literally the only organization in the world that collects all the countries of the world together on one forum to discuss these global issues. We can't afford to jettison it. It's not doing very well on this particular issue. It can be of use to India and to the rest of the world on various other issues. Let's not discard the UN over this crisis, but let us admit it is congenitally, chronically unable to act in a situation where a permanent member is on the warpath.
May I ask you one final question on this, which is that, do you sense, based on the last week, have we tilted too far towards placating the Israel-American axis at the cost of Iran? Do you believe that we need to therefore maintain a much tighter balance given our interests in the region? Or do you believe that we need to be seen to be with the winning side, as some call it, with the more powerful side? Do you believe that we've tilted far too much towards Israel and America or not?
Well, we have not applauded this action. We have not endorsed this action. So in that sense...
But we've not condemned it either.
We have not condemned it either. Similarly, we have kept open lines of communication to Iran, and we have expressed a hope that matters will be resolved very quickly. That seems to be the choice that we have made. Now, you could ask yourself, why not condemn it? The question is, if we condemn it, what good does it do to Iran? Are we going to send them weapons? We're not. Are we going to support them in the conflict? We're not. So the condemnation is cheap, it's words. But in the process, do we lose leverage over the West? Do we lose leverage over the US? Look at other countries in an analogous situation and the silences they've kept. I mean, you have to understand, Rajdeep, academics, journalists, and outsiders can always take a stand of principle. I've articulated the principles for you. But as a government, what does the Indian government need to do to ensure that there are no consequences from the stand it takes for the people of India and the interests of India? if I were in government or advising government, those are the questions that would be uppermost in my mind too.
Right.
So I find it difficult to sit here outside the government and say, I want the government to say all these things, because the government then has to live with the consequences. And if the consequences are we get 50% sanctions again on India, then my job as opposition would be to say, look at this hopeless government, they've given us 50% sanctions once more. So you have to understand, governments make choices all the time. And we, as an alternative party of government, we also have to think about what we would do if we were in power.
I think there's a message in what you've said, both for the government and indeed for your own party and the opposition. But Shashi Tharoor, for joining me ahead of your 70th birthday. I know you turned 70 on the 9th of March. I don't want to remind you about that, but I know that you've got a big couple of days coming up.
I've just been launching Dr. Karan Singh's biography, and he turns 95 on the 9th of March. So we have a quarter of a century between us, and it's been fascinating. It's a great date. And since you're a cricket fan, I believe the wicketkeeper Parthiv Patel also shares that birthday with us.
Well, so speaking about cricket and Shashi Tharoor, at the moment, Sanju Samson is probably the most popular Thiruvananthapuramite, if I may call it, ahead of you, Dr. Tharoor, and I hope that...
I'm happy to yield place to him. Let him continue earning that on Sunday too.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shashi Tharoor, for joining me here on the news today.
All the best. Thanks, Raji.
Now, we're getting more news in just now amidst the controversy over the Iranian ship Iris Dena. Remember, that was sunk off the coast of Sri Lanka by an American torpedo. India has decided to give shelter to another Iranian ship. Government sources saying India was approached by Iran to take in the Iranian ship Iris Lavan, which was also in the region for the International Fleet Review. Request was received on 20th of February, indicating that a docking at Kochi was urgent as the vessel had developed technical issues. Approval was accorded for the docking on the 1st of March. Iris Lavan has since docked at Kochi on the 4th of March, and its crew of 183 are currently accommodated at naval facilities in Kochi. So interesting developments there taking place. I want to turn to some of your tweets that you put out in recent days. You seem to suggest that in some way India must be very careful in not ceding its autonomy to the strategic autonomy above all else. How do you see it? Do you believe that in this US-Israel war against Iran, it's becoming very difficult to maintain a neutral position?
Sorry, Rajdeep, there seems to be some issue with the video. I don't think you can see me.
No, I can now.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Could you say that question? Could you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
My question to you is that you put out a series of tweets were concerned over strategic autonomy, in particular in the context of US-Israel war against Iran, that India must be seen to hold its own. What do you mean by hold its own? What is the position that India can take in this highly polarized, surcharged atmosphere?
First and foremost, I think India, Rajdeep, is a country that has always stood by principle, that has always followed a normative approach to global affairs and happenings on the international stage. Having said that, when it comes to the unfolding crisis that you are seeing now, with the war between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other, this is not a war from which or on which we can afford to say that we are not affected. I think the discussion with Dr. Tharoor told our audience about the impact and the fallout for Indians, whether it's Indians in the Gulf, whether it's the oil economy, our energy security, whether it's the happenings with the sinking of the Iranian ship off, basically off the coast of Sri Lanka, within our neighborhood, as we call it, the Indian Ocean zone. So for all these reasons, obviously we cannot divorce ourselves from what is happening on this whole unfolding conflict situation that is before us. On the
But
question,
how does one
on the-
how does one deal with
I'm
an
sorry?
I mean, how does one deal with someone as unpredictable, ma'am, as Donald Trump, given the fact that here is someone who obviously is engaged in power politics? Even the wordplay of saying that he's given, that India will be given this 30-day waiver, the language of it, the manner in which the Defense Secretary of America says Iran will be toast. How does one deal with someone who uses this kind of constant language of belligerence?
Well, I think the language has been rather revealing. It has been unusually blunt. It is as if Washington is granting, uh, if you please, permission to India. It's allowed a 30-day waiver for the purchase of Russian oil, and it's just 30 days. Obviously, it doesn't want Russia to gain any significant financial benefit from the sale of such oil to India. And it also expects India to ramp up purchases of American oil. So, these are messages that are embedded in the announcement that Mr. Scott Bessent made. So, the phrasing, I believe, does contain an awkward optic for India because it makes it appear that India has received permission, although we have been saying all along that we buy Russian oil based on our national interest. So
Because India has, yeah,
this
because
kind
India,
of language.
yeah, because when I look at the data clearly shows while India's purchases of oil, Russian oil have significantly reduced in the last 6 months, India still continues to purchase about 20% of its oil still comes from the Russians. You see, all of this is coming against the backdrop, of course, of the way in which Donald Trump is conducting foreign policy. It's not a rules-based international order, clearly. One day you're targeting Venezuela, off with the head of the Venezuelan head of state, and you sort of capture him. Now you're targeting the Iranian regime. When you're dealing with someone who's so unpredictable, what happens to the conventional rules in a way, the rules-based order? What you're saying would apply if there was a rules-based order, ma'am. In the absence of that, how does one deal with someone like Donald Trump? How can one maintain a position wherein one can safeguard one's interests publicly? Or does it always have to be done through quiet diplomacy behind the table, behind doors, closed doors?
Well, I think quiet diplomacy certainly has its meaning, has its uses, and continues to have its relevance. And I believe in the long run, if the conflict plays itself out for a much longer period than we've expected, I believe India will have to take a stand at some stage. It's still early days of the conflict. I have argued that a theory of silence or guarded silence may not be a good theory for our foreign policy, but obviously I'm not privy to the thinking of the government in this regard, and one has to make some allowance for their sovereign thinking on these issues. But let me say that, for instance, the ASEAN group of countries has come out with a fairly strong and persuasive statement about the unfolding situation. And we are very close to the ASEAN. The ASEAN is very much in our neighborhood, and I think there are certain conclusions to be drawn from such developments.
But you, very interestingly, after Donald Trump came to power, you framed a jungle analogy. When Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela's, was captured by the US, you had said, ma'am, and I quote you here, India's task is not to applaud or to moralize, but to stay consistent with its own strategic logic. India lives in a jungle world where power rules the forest, yet it also relies on sovereignty and non-intervention when it matters close to home. Strategic autonomy today means understanding power without surrendering principle, holding both in tension with clarity, foresight, and discipline. How much has the jungle since changed, and what is our place in this jungle? If Donald Trump is not going to abide by any principles, what place does a country like India have?
We definitely have our place. When I used the metaphor of the jungle, what I was aiming at illustrating, as far as my readers were concerned, is that in this definition of this new scheme of things where the world order, as we have been accustomed to, has shown signs of rupture, it's really a hinge moment. I don't believe, a new world order has come into being to succeed what we had all these years. But what we are confronted with is a situation, and obviously a geopolitical situation, where power matters, where rules may exist, but they are unevenly applied, and survival for all countries, including ours, depends on awareness, it depends on adaptability. There are a number of predatory forces that surround us. It's not a unipolar jungle anymore. It's in many ways a multipolar jungle. The United States remains powerful. China is rising. Russia is disruptive. Regional powers are asserting themselves, and our own place in the jungle is evolving. That's how I would define this new scheme of things.
Fascinating the way you put it, Nirupama Rao. I wish we had, we didn't have the camera, unfortunately, but we'll try and rectify that the next time we have you on the show. But I really appreciate you joining us and giving us your definition of this multipolar world. It's a fascinating description of this law of the jungle that's prevailing at the moment. Let's take you through the top developments on day 7 of the war. Israel continues to fire missiles towards Iran. Israeli forces carried out fresh strikes in capital city of Tehran and Isfahan, where a nuclear facility is based. Israel also claims it's eliminated a senior commander of the present Iranian regime. Iran continues to target US-related assets across the Gulf region. Iranian state media claims they struck a US base in Kuwait. Tehran says it has also attacked a US-owned oil tanker off the coast of Kuwait. A media report claims that it was possibly the United States which struck an elementary school in the Iranian town of Minab, killing more than 160, most of whom were girl students, while Washington says it is still investigating the incident. The Reuters report reveals the school was struck at the same time precision strikes were being carried out in Iran. After eliminating the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, Israel continues to target Tehran's leadership. Israeli forces conducted strikes at an underground bunker of the late Supreme Leader. 50 jets carried out the airstrikes in the Iranian leadership's compound in the capital. Iranian missiles have struck Bahrain's Babco Energy's refinery in Sidra, causing a fire that has been contained with no injuries reported and refinery operations continuing. And joining me now is another of our special guests. I'm joined by Ravi Agarwal. He's Editor-in-Chief of Foreign Policy based there in New York. Appreciate you joining us, Ravi. Just make sense of this last week for our viewers here in India. Has this taken you and other analysts completely by surprise, the manner in which this war has been prosecuted and how quickly it's almost being turned into a regional war of sorts?
So I won't exactly call it surprise, Rajdeep, because the Trump administration had telegraphed many of these things ahead of time. They had always said that they did not really think the diplomatic talks were going to work. They had clearly amassed all of this weaponry and the aircraft carriers in the region. And usually when the Trump administration does that, they use it, with the precedent we've seen in Venezuela and also Iran last year. And then thirdly, we've always known that this is something Israel wanted to do, and there was open talk that Israel would start the attack and the United States would join. So I am not, in fact, surprised that this has happened. I think what is surprising so far in the last few days of this conflict is that Khamenei was assassinated as quickly as he was. That surprised me. And then the fact that Iran actually has come good on what it said it would do. It said it would regionalize the war ahead of time were it to be attacked. And it has actually done that. That to some degree has surprised me. So the attacks on a number of US bases around the Gulf, the Middle East, more broadly on civilian targets as well, that kind of lashing out in response tells me that the regime is desperate. They have their backs against the wall. They will do whatever they can. And at this point, Rajdeep, this is now a question of who has a higher pain threshold. Does Israel have a higher pain threshold to keep going, or Iran? And I didn't even mention the United States there because I think President Trump has the lowest pain threshold of the three participants in this war.
Interesting, you're saying that President Trump has the lowest pain threshold of the three participants. So presumably the last thing he wants is a protracted war. Do you think that at some stage he might have thought that this would become Venezuela when they were preparing for this war? It'll be a quick, decisive victory. Or were the Americans prepared for a potential long haul? And is Donald Trump mentally prepared for a long haul wherein criticisms might mount against him back home?
Look, I think they were militarily prepared in that they clearly had amassed all of this firepower and also defensive artillery around the region. So they were militarily prepared. In terms of psychologically prepared, politically prepared, I'm not so sure. I mean, remember, Donald Trump did not sell this war to the American people. It is unpopular at home. It is technically illegal because Congress is supposed to approve these things. By international law, it is also illegal. There was no attempt to have consultations at the United Nations or among the international community more broadly. All of those things could come back to hurt the Trump administration. But I think most of all, what matters here is that Trump came to power saying very clearly that he doesn't like to be mired in long-term conflicts. He's criticized the war in Iraq. He's criticized the war in Afghanistan. And I think the Venezuela action in January may have created a false sense of security that the United States can go in quickly and achieve its ends. And then Rajdeep, finally, it's unclear what the American goal was here. Was it regime change? Was it purely hurting its nuclear program? Was it hurting the missile program? Israel has a much clearer set of objectives. I'm not so sure the United States did. And in part because of that uncertainty, I think Trump may struggle to figure out when exactly to exit this war.
What, according to you, are the US and Israel objectives then? As you said, there's no clarity over the US objectives. Is it regime change? Is it not? Is it just getting Iran to abandon its nuclear program? Is it getting a more moderate leadership in place? The Israelis seem to want the annihilation of the entire leadership of Iran. Will those objectives somewhere perhaps diverge at some stage or the other? Is that? I'm just trying to understand from all the guests I've had over the last week, what is the end game?
Well, it would help if someone was clear about that on any of the sides here. I think the United States has not been clear. In fact, they've said yes to every single thing you just said: regime change, hitting the nuclear installations, the missile installations, and also the protesters and supporting democracy in Iran. The United States has said yes to each of those things already. But of course, you can't have all of those objectives. So I think the United States has not gone in with a clear set of objectives. Israel, I think, does have a clear set of objectives. And I think you just said it there. I think it's annihilation of the regime. I don't think they care about what comes next as long as it is severely weakened and unable to attack them. The third player here, of course, is Iran. And I think Iran's objective at this point is survival. The regime wants to survive at any cost. And the reason why it is attacking a range of actors in the Middle East and the Gulf is because Rajdeep, offense is much easier than defense. When you send a swarm of drones to Dubai, or when you shoot a ballistic missile at Doha, a lot of these, the drones cost $20,000 a piece. The ballistic missile is part of an arsenal of thousands. But when you try to shoot down these things, you're using up very, very expensive interceptors and missile defense systems that are a ratio of, 100 to 1 in terms of cost. And so a lot of these countries and Israel and the United States are very worried about running out of their defenders, their interceptors, before Iran can keep going. So in that sense, the Iranian regime just wants to survive as long as it can, and then emerge from this weakened, but still intact.
What, therefore, for you is the most likely scenario? I know this is a tough question to answer, particularly with Donald Trump in the White House. You never know what happens next. But what is the most likely scenario, in your view, now that we are almost a week into this conflict?
I think continued degradation of Iranian attacking ability, whether it's missiles or drones. I think the regime will end up in some severely weakened form, ending up surviving. I do not think this ends in democracy for Iran, at least not in the short term. And that's because this regime has gone down a path of absolute repression. And as long as there are soldiers, the Basij, the IRGC, which number in the hundreds of thousands, as long as they exist, they will not allow for an alternative. The United States is the key actor here, and a lot depends on how long it stays in this war. My suspicion is that with each passing day, if there are more losses to US allies in the region, then the United States will find it harder and harder to stay in and to provide a clear rationale for staying in. A lot depends on that. And through that, we will understand what kind of Iran will emerge from here.
Do you see a possibility of this conflict escalating beyond West Asia? Or is this largely now a conflict confined to who controls West Asia? It's had a spillover on other parts of the world. We've had an Iranian warship which was torpedoed in the Indian Ocean. But by and large, do you believe this will be a conflict that will play out only in West Asia? Or could there be any possibility of it having any repercussions beyond the region?
Oh, the possibilities are already there. You mentioned the torpedo attack on the Iranian ship in the Indian Ocean. That sets a very dangerous precedent. And if you are, in the Iranian military, you will now be looking to retaliate in some form, in some way, somewhere. And I think part of Tehran's strategy is not just survival, but to raise the costs for Israel and particularly the United States. And by raise the costs, I mean both militarily, but also politically. Iran wants the rest of the world to pressure the United States to stop this now. So that pressure can come from the form of higher crude prices. It can come from the form of Europeans or India saying, look, we are facing losses or suffering in various ways. That kind of political diplomatic pressure as well. I think Iran will be looking to pull every single lever it can. Because again, I mean, I can't stress enough how much they feel like they have their backs to the wall. And this is existential for this Iranian leadership, what's left of it. They will pull every lever they can. Again, the fact that they're attacking Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, we've now got three of the biggest airline hubs in the world have shut down, causing global travel chaos. This is serious pain now to a lot of people around the world.
You're saying it's existential for Iran. Presumably for Netanyahu, it's the opportunity he's been waiting for a long time to annihilate the Iranian leadership. And for Donald Trump, it's about legacy, that here is a president who took out the Iranian leadership. Would I be right in saying that that's how the three principal players are looking? One looking for survival, the other for complete dominance over a region, and the third looking at legacy.
I think that's exactly right. I think for Netanyahu, it is also about survival because he has, corruption charges against him. He needs to be seen at home as a tough, strong leader who keeps the people safe. They will have elections at some point, and he, of course, needs to keep winning elections to not have those corruption cases against him proceed. But yes, you're right in your assessment of the three leaders. I think Trump, again, is the wild card here because he does care about legacy, but a lot depends on how this is read, how the events of the past week are spun in the United States. This war is not popular in the United States. Trump has not done a good enough job of explaining to the American people why the United States is involved. And once the price at the pump, the gas prices in the United States start going up, as they already have, he will have to explain why that is the case as spring and summer approaches here.
My final question, do you see India having any role at all? Can a country remain perfectly neutral in this hyper-polarized environment? Can India tread that cautious? Is cautious diplomacy the way forward, or should India be taking a stand and drawing a red line somewhere or the other, saying enough is enough, territorial sovereignty cannot be violated?
Well, it's hard to advise New Delhi what to do given how polarized the world is, and also given how rules and norms have been challenged before this as well. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. I think the way to do these things is generally quietly and behind the scenes diplomatically. I think, again, what happened in the Indian Ocean in particular will be very troubling to the Modi administration. And I'm sure that behind the scenes, they will have passed on that sentiment to the United States. But in any real way, in terms of either supporting the Iranians or Israel, I cannot imagine it being in India's interest to get involved.
Okay. Ravi Agarwal of Foreign Policy joining me there from New York. Always appreciate your time. Thanks very much, Ravi. Okay, I want to leave you with an image of the day, an image which shows perhaps just where this war has reached. Because as the war in West Asia intensifies, guess what? We've seen prayers echo inside the White House. Now, Donald Trump says he's fighting some kind of a holy war, a just war. What was he seen doing? Praying with a group of pastors in the Oval Office in a video released by aides. The footage shows Trump seated at the Resolute desk with his eyes closed as evangelical pastor Greg Laurie led a prayer for the president and for US troops in these challenging times, as he described them. Several pastors stood around him, some placing their hands on him in prayer. Trump aide Margot Martin said the president had welcomed pastors from across the country to the White House. We leave you with these visuals and wonder, is this the kind of war that the world wants to see, which is sanctioned by religious pastors on one side and clerics on the other? Or do we want to see a world committed to peace in the truest sense? It's a question that only Donald Trump can answer. Let's hope he gets up on the right side of the bed come tomorrow morning. Thanks for watching. Stay well. Stay safe.
And the Lord, you will
Jai
guide
Hind.
him
Namaskar.
in these challenging times that we're facing today. I pray for your grace and your protection.